change in Iran will happen at the hands of the Iranian people. For instance, you look at the concerns that some governments may have. Does this mean that we have to get engaged yet again in another campaign that involves military strikes or I don't know what? I said, not at all. The best army you have are the people on the ground, which is the Iranian people themselves.
Speak now to regime critic and son of the last Shah of Iran, Reza Pahlavi. Good morning. Thank you for joining us in the studio.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Now, I think it's worth us just taking a step back, because for most people, when they hear about Iran, they think enemy, bad state, not a good player in the world order. How would you characterize Iran's place in the world right now?
Well, I'm glad you raised this, because the most important distinction that everybody needs to make is that the Iranian people are not represented by this regime. When you talk about Iran, are you talking about the people of Iran, or are we referring to the regime and what it's done? In 46 years, the track record of this regime has been nothing short of misery and poverty and violence and terror. And it's not representative of the aspiration of a nation that has been the first victim, or the first hostage, if you will, of this regime. The aspiration of my fellow compatriots are in line with the same values and principles that the free world enjoys: human rights, equality, non-discrimination, particularly sexual discrimination. As pointed in the intro, the Iranian women were the first victim of this regime. They are treated as second-class citizens. Not to mention elements of repression, discrimination against religions. So the Iranian nation is now looking for an opportunity to free themselves. And I think the moment has arrived. We are talking about a unique situation where the world can be of assistance and help us successful in putting an end to the regime that is the root cause of all the problems we face today, not just in the region, but across the planet.
Do you have any way of knowing or measuring how supportive the people who are currently living in Iran would be of regime change? Because what we're talking about would be, it would be a fundamental change. It would not necessarily be simple. We've seen what happened in Afghanistan. There was a suggestion that would be a great moment. It's actually taken women backwards in many cases. What's the appetite for this change? Well,
first of all, I think if you concentrate a lot more on what you can easily find on social media and various forms that people manifest their desire or their anger and their protest. Case in point, yesterday was the 46th anniversary of the revolution, and slogans that people are chanting on the streets clearly are against the regime. They say death to the dictator, death to the Islamic Republic. And I think in many former shapes in recent years, they have manifested their rejection of the regime and pretty much sending the message across the world that, we want to be liberated. But as you pointed rightfully, certain scenarios that we have seen recently in the area were not necessarily good examples. And in fact, I wanted to stress the point that the change that we seek for Iran has nothing to do with the scenarios of change that we have recently observed. Case in point, Iraq, which was the worst type of handling the situation. And I've always said that change in Iran will happen at the hands of the Iranian people. For instance, you look at the concerns that some governments may have. Does this mean that we have to get engaged yet again in another campaign that involves military strikes or I don't know what? I said, not at all. The best army you have are the people on the ground, which is the Iranian people themselves.
But those people
we need to just help them.
Those people are incredibly oppressed. The violence is used against young women protesting, for example, in the country at the moment. I assume that you are seeking to put yourself forward as the person who could lead that charge and potentially lead the country too. But how do you get from the idea to the change on the ground when that regime is still very strong and ruling with a pretty iron fist?
Well, it's not the first time in history that we have seen people overcome pretty ruthless regime or dictatorial regimes. But it hasn't happened without some level and degree of support from the outside. I have a plan, a 5-point plan of how to achieve that. And some of it has an aspect of how we can organize ourselves at home on the basis of, civil disobedience as a method of bringing pressure from within. But it would require simultaneously a campaign of maximum pressure on the regime from the outside world, coupled with a campaign of maximum support. Empowerment is always important when you are having people who are defenseless vis-a-vis an extremely repressive regime. But at the end of the day, I think the combination of these two forms of pressure forces the regime to retreat and ultimately paralysis and collapse, but at the least cost possible to the nation. as a means of offering an opportunity for an exit strategy from those who want to peel away from the regime and defect to the other side, which is beginning to happen.
And so I presume in that mission, in that cause of yours, Donald Trump, the American president, becomes incredibly important. Have you spoken to him? Do you have his support? Do you think he'd be willing to support you in this?
Well, my team has been in touch with the transition team, and I think the people who are now constituting his immediate core group are well aware of the situation in Iran. And I think they understand that the ask and desire of the Iranian people is totally opposite to what this regime represents and does. And it is important to have that element of more pressure, unlike his predecessor, which pretty much ran a campaign of appeasement, which simply emboldened the regime to even become more aggressive. Case in point, the support for Hamas and Hezbollah, and I think October 7th was not a coincidence. On the other hand, when you revert back to maximum pressure, you force the regime into retreat. Is it sufficient? No. Can he do it alone? Perhaps it would be good to also have some allies in this process. And I think at this point we need to see where Europe stands. Are they, behind the curve? And I believe they are to some extent, but catch up to the reality of Iran and people on the ground. This is very important to understand because nobody wants a scenario of conflict and war. But diplomacy has failed for a good reason, because the DNA of this regime simply cannot coexist with the way the free world operates. They simply cannot adjust to that. The Iranian people, on the other hand, can, and they are the solution to the problem. So you're really investing on an alternative rather than kicking the can down the road and prolong the status quo, which will inevitably might lead us to more confrontation should there not be a breakthrough in diplomacy. Yeah. What I suggest, therefore, is that if diplomacy has failed and you cannot expect a different outcome doing more of the same, this time come and invest on the people as your true allies in the alternative, and put an end to the regime, to put an end to all the problems, not just the nuclear threat, but terrorism, radicalism, extremism, and the financing of all these groups.
But even with the best will in the world and the people behind you, it would be a conflict. It would be a fought conflict. There would be, there would be a price to pay in lives of overthrowing a regime in Iran at the moment. And you said you don't believe that Europe has the appetite for it. I think you were banned, or you were not invited to the Munich Security Conference. I think you were later allowed in. I assume that is sort of reflecting what you're saying back. But Donald Trump has said we're not going to get involved in conflicts overseas. I mean, how realistic do you think this prospect actually is?
Well, when you always run a campaign, you say a lot of things that once you are in a position, you realize maybe it's not exactly as I thought it would be. One thing I could say about the Trump administration, at least during his first term, is that the type of pressure that was brought on the regime really showed that it had some consequence that put the regime in a bad place. The continuation of this maximum pressure, I think, is important. It's extremely important. But as I said, it's just one component. My mindset and my compatriots' mindset is that we need to be able to free ourselves from this regime. In what way can the world be of assistance? And it's more of a campaign of asking the world to empower the Iranian people by helping them more directly. So we have that element that equalizes the playing field vis-a-vis an extremely repressive regime. Are the people willing to risk? They already are. The whole point is that they're already putting their lives on the line, but they are totally abandoned by the rest of the world. It is time now to say, we've tried long enough. We give them this regime enough opportunities to come clean. They haven't, and they're continuing on the same track. Meanwhile, the people say, we are ready to sacrifice our lives to free ourselves. Are you going to be on the right side of history?
You talk about repression of the regime currently in place. I have to put this to you because there are those who say that your father ran a very oppressive regime, a dictatorship. There was secret police, that there was torture and executions, that women were treated very badly, that actually there was not very much difference from what is there now. Could you guarantee that the future of Iran would involve nothing like that if you ever were to be in a position of power there? And do you feel any responsibility for what happened before?
Well, first of all, I think that history will judge what happened before. And already, I think, as far as the Iranian people are concerned, their viewpoint about what happened and the comparison between where they are now and the past is extremely strongly showing that net, it was certainly a country that was moving forward, that many opportunities that the Iranians had, including women, as you say. Iran was a country that women obtained the right to vote 4 years before the women in Switzerland did. It was on a totally different path. Was it a perfect track record? Of course not. But in comparison, the intention was to, prosper as opposed to where we are now economically. But as far as I'm concerned, my position has always been to defend the principles of human rights and secular democracy. Why? Because I think the best way to have people participate in their system and have ownership in it is to get back to a situation where they are guaranteed under the law of equality and non-discrimination and opportunities to express their opinion, but at the same time take the responsibility as citizens to be participants as opposed to just observers. This is the kind of liberalization that Iran needs to culminate our track into getting back on track. And the vision that I have, my plan is not just about changing politics in Iran and give that opportunity, but also a roadmap to Iran's recovery and back on track for prosperity. And that means that Iranian people have to be able to reconnect with the free world, be in a position to make decisions, have the support of whatever is the talent and the expertise that can bring that into place. And the reason why Iran is lagging behind is because the regime never allowed for people who are actually concerned about the country to do anything. They kicked everybody aside. They're pretty much a paramilitary mafia that rules the country. They're simply, filling their pockets at the expense of people of Iran who are literally starving right now. Our currency has been devalued almost 14,000 times what it was at the time of the revolution. 40% inflation, 60% living under the poverty line. We need to change that.
Yeah. Reza Pahlavi, the son of the last Shah of Iran, thank you for your time on the programme this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.